The story begins with Gang Hyuk navigating through a war zone, determined to overcome every obstacle to reach a hospital. His mission is to deliver essential medical supplies to the hospital, and he successfully completes it. Later, it is reported that a hit-and-run victim died while being transported to the hospital. This marks the 13th similar case this year, raising serious public concerns. Many believe the recurring incidents highlight significant flaws in South Korea's emergency response system, which appears to be ineffective. In response to these alarming events, the Minister of Health, a resolute woman, holds a meeting with the directors of the nation's top hospitals at a prestigious medical facility. Among them is Director Choi Jo-eun, a prominent figure in the medical field. During the meeting, the minister questions the directors, demanding to know why such tragedies continue to happen. She emphasizes that trauma centers, designed as specialized facilities to treat critically injured patients requiring care beyond standard emergency services, should be capable of handling these situations effectively. The Minister of Health sternly asks, "How much funding do you receive for a single trauma center at Hankook National University Hospital?" Director Choi begins searching for data, but the minister cuts her off, raising her voice, 10 billion won. And do we see results that reflect that amount? Caught off guard, Director Choi tries to justify the situation. She responds, "If it were up to me, I would prioritize sustaining the trauma center." But there is only one trauma specialist in all of Korea. The minister is already aware of this critical shortage. Overwhelmed by the weight of her responsibilities and exhausted from overwork, she suddenly collapses in front of everyone. Gasps fill the room as the health minister lies unconscious. Director Choi, visibly shaken by the scene, turns to the others and then asks, "Do you know of any other doctor who could possibly take her place?" Her voice carries both urgency and despair, reflecting the gravity of the ongoing crisis. The Minister of Health, determined to address the critical shortage of trauma specialists, invites a renowned doctor from a distant region to take over Dr. Kwaje's position at the Hankook Trauma Center. The hospital is abuzz with anticipation as the new doctor's arrival approaches. The long-awaited doctor finally arrives at the hospital and, in a moment of calm, sits down to enjoy a quick meal. Just halfway through his burger, he notices a doctor sprinting toward the trauma team. Wasting no time, he abandons his food and follows the running doctor, sensing the urgency of the situation. Inside the trauma room, the scene is intense. A patient with a knife lodged deep in his body is lying on the table. The new doctor steps forward and assesses the situation quickly. He instructs the team to perform a CT scan but firmly warns them not to remove the knife, as it is preventing excessive bleeding. As they carefully remove the patient's clothing, he notices bruising on the chest. His sharp instincts kick in. "Wait, cancel the CT scan," he commands. This is cardiac tamponade. He requests an urgent call for a surgeon while monitoring the patient's plummeting blood pressure, which drops dangerously to 50 to 40. The tension in the room rises as they discover that all the surgeons are occupied in other operations. The new doctor hesitates, weighing the risks of waiting for a CT scan versus taking immediate invasive action. Suddenly, to everyone's shock, the new arrival steps forward decisively. At this point, no one in the room knows he is a doctor. Without hesitation, he grabs the knife and pulls it out with a swift motion. The trauma team gasps in horror and disbelief, fearing the worst. Despite their shock, the bold action hints at the confidence and expertise of this mysterious doctor. The room falls silent, all eyes fixed on him, awaiting the outcome of his daring decision. Everyone in the room stared at the new arrival, their shock turning into curiosity. "Who are you?" one of them finally asked. Ignoring the question, the mysterious doctor focused on the patient. With precise movements, he began performing a pericardiocentesis, using a needle to drain the blood trapped around the heart. The patient's blood pressure, which had been critically low, began to stabilize. Turning to the doctor assigned to the trauma team, the newcomer asked sharply, "You're here, yet you can't even perform a simple pericardiocentesis?" The flustered doctor, clearly out of his depth, stammered, "Well, my specialty is the lower gastrointestinal tract. I deal with the anus." The new doctor raised an eyebrow and asked, "Then why are you wandering around in the emergency room?" The embarrassed doctor tried to explain, "I'm here because I was assigned. We rotate between surgeries, covering various departments." Despite the explanation, tension crackled between them. Finally, the trauma doctor snapped, "Who are you, exactly? I appreciate your help, but you need to leave. This is my workspace." It was at that moment the newcomer straightened up and introduced himself confidently. "I'm the new trauma specialist. I'll be working in this department moving forward." A wave of realization swept over the room. The assigned doctor's face fell as he stammered, "Wait, are you the one replacing Dr. Kwan?" The new doctor nodded, his calm demeanor now commanding the respect of the room. "That's correct," he replied. The once tense atmosphere shifted, the trauma team now understanding they were in the presence of someone who not only had the credentials but also the courage and skill to back them up. This marked the beginning of a new chapter for the Hankook Trauma Center.
The new doctor formally introduced himself, stating, "I'm Baek Gang-hyuk, and I'll be taking over the trauma department. This isn't your area, it's mine now." The attending doctor, still flustered, stammered, "Are you really the one replacing Dr. Kwan?" Dr. Baek nodded with calm authority, his confidence filling the room. Then, with a mischievous smirk, he turned to the attending doctor and said, "From now on, I'll just call you Anus." The attending doctor, clearly offended, quickly corrected him. "It's J1. My name is J1. Dr. Baek shrugged. "I only bother remembering the names of important people." Wanting to test him, Dr. Baek asked, "So, tell me, what's the next step?" Dr. J1 hesitated before answering, "A CT scan. You need to assess the patient's current condition thoroughly." Dr. Baek listened but then interjected. "The patient was stabbed with a broken knife. There's likely swelling, and soon, that wound is going to rupture." As if on cue, the patient's wound burst, causing the team to spring into action. Dr. Baek immediately took charge, commanding, "Prepare the operating room right now." While the situation unfolded in the trauma room, two hospital directors were having a private conversation elsewhere. They discussed the recruitment of Dr. Baek, sharing gossip about his remarkable skills and achievements. "Have you heard the rumors about Dr. Baek? They say he's exceptional," one director said with a mix of admiration and skepticism. The other director added, "But there are whispers that he got in through connections. After all, he's just a graduate of Muhan Medical School. How could someone like him make it to Hankook?" Despite their doubts, they acknowledged Dr. Baek's extensive experience. Since joining the World Peace Medical Association 6 years ago, he had handled countless trauma cases from war zones and disaster-stricken areas, honing his expertise far beyond what a traditional hospital setting could offer. As word of Dr. Baek's daring actions in the trauma room spread through the hospital, the directors began to wonder if they had underestimated the newcomer.
Kang Myung-wei, the Minister of Health, was the one who had arranged for Dr. Baek to join Hankook Hospital. She arrived at the hospital to attend a formal event welcoming the new trauma specialist. However, Dr. Baek was nowhere near the ceremony. He was on his way to the operating room instead. In the trauma department, the team had urgently called for an anesthesiologist to assist with the surgery. Dr. Wang, the on-call anesthesiologist, refused, stating he was about to leave for the day. Frustrated, Dr. Baek grabbed the phone himself and, in his blunt and commanding tone, growled, "Dr. Wang, if you're not in the operating room before I get there, you'd better watch out." Intimidated by Dr. Baek's authoritative demeanor, Dr. Wang reluctantly complied and rushed to the operating room. Once the surgery began, tensions escalated. Dr. Wang, in an attempt to make his work easier, made a critical mistake that jeopardized the patient's stability. Dr. Baek didn't hesitate. He ordered Dr. Wang to leave the operating room immediately, stunning the entire team. "Get me another anesthesiologist," he barked, his tone leaving no room for argument. Word spread quickly about Dr. Beck's decision, causing uproar among the hospital's anesthesiology department. The senior anesthesiologists were furious. Who does he think he is? The anesthesiologist is supposed to hold the most authority during surgery, not the surgeon. How dare he dismiss one of us like that? To avoid further delays in the critical surgery, they sent an intern, Dr. Park, to replace Dr. Wong. Dr. Park, visibly nervous but determined, stepped into the operating room, where Dr. Beck wasted no time laying out his expectations. "Follow my lead and stay sharp. There's no room for error here," he instructed sternly. Meanwhile, outside the operating room, Kong Myung-wei observed the unfolding drama. Though concerned about the friction Dr. Beck was causing, she couldn't help but admire his uncompromising dedication to saving lives. As whispers of his bold actions circulated throughout the hospital, it became clear that his presence was already shaking up Hankook Hospital in more ways than one. The surgery finally concluded successfully. One of the doctors in the operating room remarked, "This type of surgery usually takes much longer, but this was quick." Dr. Beck, adjusting his gloves, replied, "It should have taken just an hour and a half. But we went over by 10 minutes. Now, I'm late for my own induction ceremony." Meanwhile, the Minister of Health, Kong Myung-wei, and the rest of the attendees had been waiting patiently for Dr. Beck's arrival. Unbeknownst to them, he had been performing an emergency operation. Some had started murmuring about his tardiness, unaware of the life he had just saved. Had things been so simple, the tension might have dissipated. But reality was far from easy. In the meeting hall of Korea National University Hospital, the atmosphere was thick with curiosity and skepticism. Dr. Beck Guang, freshly introduced as the new professor heading the heavy trauma division, stood confidently at the podium. His demeanor was calm, but his words immediately stirred the room. "I am Dr. Beck Guang, and I will be leading the severe trauma division. But before we begin, let me make one thing clear: I will not apologize. In fact, I believe I am owed an apology." A wave of murmurs spread across the hall. Some attendees exchanged bewildered glances, while others leaned in, intrigued by his boldness. Dr. Beck continued, a hint of dry humor in his tone, "It feels like I've been brought here to serve as a puppet for the administration. But let's not dwell on that. The real issue lies within the system itself." His expression turned serious as he critiqued the hospital's long-standing practices. For years, severe trauma cases have been shuffled between departments, handled by doctors without proper specialization. It's like passing a live grenade from one person to another. Professor Han Yuram, the head of the colorectal surgery department, spoke up. "Dr. Beck, your words are harsh but not entirely untrue. The system does need significant improvement." Dr. Beck explained his late arrival, citing the emergency operation he had just completed. "I couldn't stand by while a patient's life was at risk due to the hospital's inefficiencies. That's why I'm here, to ensure no life is lost to a broken system." As he concluded, Dr. Beck pledged to transform the trauma division into a top-tier center. "The 100 billion won investment won't go to waste. I'll prove we can do better." Though his speech began with tension, it ended with a cautious optimism. Professor Han added her support, saying, "He may be blunt, but he's one of the finest doctors I've ever met. Let's give him a chance." The event ended with hesitant applause, which gradually grew into genuine support. Hope was in the air that Dr. Beck could bring the much-needed change to the hospital's trauma care. After Dr. Beck finished his induction ceremony, he didn't stick around to chat. Without wasting any time, he quickly left the crowd, including the Minister of Health and the hospital director, behind. His next priority was to check on his patients. As he was walking through the corridors, he spotted a doctor rushing by, heading toward a room he intended to enter. But when he reached the door, he realized he couldn't get in. He hadn't been given any identification yet. The nurse inside didn't recognize him. Curious, the nurse asked if he was a doctor, and Dr. Beck hesitated. He couldn't remember the name of the patient being treated, nor did he know the name of the doctor, but he did know one thing. The nickname they used for him was Anus. The nurse seemed confused by this, but just as things were about to escalate, another doctor rushed in, panting from his sprint. "There's been a mountain climbing accident," he gasped. Dr. Beck's eyes sharpened. "When's the helicopter arriving?" The doctor replied, "It will be here soon," to which Dr. Beck responded, "Then we'll head over and take care of them." The doctor was taken aback by his words. Dr. Beck finally gained access to the room, but as he entered, he found himself face to face with the same nurse who had been so adamant about keeping him out. The nurse, startled to see him again, pointed to a tattoo on his arm and began to form wild, exaggerated thoughts in her mind. Her imagination ran wild, envisioning a chaotic hospital fire caused by his actions as if he had some hidden agenda with the patients. The two exchanged tense words, with the nurse almost demanding that Dr. Beck leave. However, the nurse was no match for his confidence, and she struggled to make him budge. It was only when the other doctor intervened, explaining that Dr. Beck was, in fact, the doctor in charge, that the nurse realized her mistake. Frustrated, Dr. Beck turned to the nurse and, with a smirk, called her a thug, which only added to the tension in the room. Finally, with no more interruptions, the two doctors dashed off to the helicopter. Along the way, there was a moment of humor as Dr. Beck realized the doctor was deathly afraid of heights. Watching the terrified doctor cling to the side of the helicopter was a scene full of laughter. It was a whirlwind of events, but as always, Dr. Beck was unfazed, focused only on saving lives. If you want to see how it all unfolded, check it out on the official website.